She had $7 in her bank account and a choice that would either destroy her life or change it forever. When Sarah leaned across that table and whispered the truth to a billionaire, his girlfriend's eyes turned ice cold. By morning, everything Sarah knew was gone. But what happened next? Nobody saw it coming. Not even her. This is the true story of what happens when you risk everything to do what's right. And I promise you, by the end of this, you'll never look at courage the same way again. Stay with me. Welcome to Voice of Granny. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from. Have you ever been in a situation where you saw something wrong happening and you had to choose between staying quiet to protect yourself or speaking up and risking everything? That's exactly where Sarah found herself on a cold Tuesday night in Chicago. And what she decided to do in that single moment would change her entire life in ways she never imagined. Sarah Williams had been working as a server at the Golden Rose for almost 3 years. It wasn't just any restaurant. This was the kind of place where celebrities ate, where business deals worth millions happened over dinner, where a single bottle of wine could cost more than Sarah made in 2 weeks. She had learned early on that in places like this, servers were supposed to be invisible. You smile, you serve, you stay quiet, and you definitely don't get involved in the personal lives of the guests. That particular Tuesday evening, the rain was coming down hard outside, drumming against the tall windows that looked out over the Chicago skyline. Sarah was moving between tables with practiced ease, her uniform crisp and perfect despite the rush of the dinner service. She had just picked up a tray of expensive cocktails when she noticed table 12 being prepared in the VIP area. Then he walked in, and the entire atmosphere of the restaurant seemed to shift. His name was David Harrison, and even if you didn't follow business news, you knew who he was. He owned one of the biggest real estate empires in the country. Buildings with his name on them stood in cities across America. Forbes magazine had recently called him one of the most influential developers of his generation. He was the kind of person whose decisions affected thousands of lives. Walking beside him was a woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine. Her name was Victoria Sterling. Actress, social media influencer, someone with millions of followers who watched her every move. The tabloids had been covering their relationship for months, calling them the perfect power couple. Sarah approached their table with the same professional smile she gave everyone. She set down their drinks carefully, greeting them politely. David barely looked up from his phone, nodding absently. But Victoria looked right through her, as if Sarah wasn't even a real person. Just part of the furniture. Just someone who existed to serve. Sarah turned to walk away, ready to check on her other tables. But something made her pause. Something she saw out of the corner of her eye. Victoria's phone was in her lap, hidden under the table. Her thumbs were moving rapidly across the screen, typing message after message. And there was this smile on her face. Not the smile she wore for the cameras. This was different. Secretive. Excited. Sarah's eyes drifted across the restaurant, following Victoria's occasional glances. That's when she saw him. A man in an expensive suit sitting at the bar, drink in hand, staring directly at Victoria. When their eyes met, he raised his glass slightly and smiled. Victoria's fingers moved faster on her phone. The man checked his own phone and smirked. Sarah's stomach dropped. She had seen this before. The hidden texts, the secret looks, the betrayal happening right under someone's nose. But this was different. This wasn't just any couple. This was David Harrison, a man who probably trusted Victoria completely, sitting there completely unaware while she carried on with someone else just feet away from him. Sarah told herself to walk away. Mind your own business. You're just a server. This isn't your problem. But something inside her wouldn't let it go. Maybe it was because she had been betrayed before and knew how much it hurt. Maybe it was because David sat there so trusting, so vulnerable without even knowing it. Or maybe Sarah was just tired of watching people like Victoria treat others like they didn't matter while getting away with terrible things. Her heart started pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Her hands began to shake slightly as she picked up a water pitcher. She knew what she was about to do could cost her everything. Her job, her reputation, maybe even her safety. But she couldn't stay silent. 10 minutes later, Sarah returned to their table, moving slowly, deliberately. She refilled David's water glass, then Victoria's, her movements calm even though inside she was terrified. Then she leaned down close to David, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but I think you need to know something." David looked up at her, confusion crossing his face. "Yes, Sarah took a breath. Your girlfriend has been texting someone at the bar for the last 20 minutes. That man in the dark blue suit. They've been looking at each other and smiling. I just thought you should know. The words hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. David's expression didn't change much, but something shifted in his eyes. They became sharper, more focused. He looked at Sarah for a long moment, then slowly turned his gaze toward Victoria. Victoria's head snapped up. She had heard everything. Her face went from surprise to pure rage in seconds. Excuse me? Her voice cut through the quiet hum of the restaurant like a knife. What did you just say? Sarah straightened up, forcing herself to stay calm even though every instinct screamed at her to run. I saw you texting someone under the table. I thought he deserved to know. Victoria stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly across the floor. Several nearby diners turned to look. How dare you? Victoria's voice was getting louder. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? You're a server. You bring food and keep your mouth shut. That's your job. The restaurant was starting to go quiet. People were staring. Sarah felt every pair of eyes on her. I'm just telling the truth, Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. You can be angry at me, but that doesn't change what I saw. Victoria's face was bright red now, twisted with anger. Her hand shot out and swept across the table, knocking over her wine glass. It shattered against the white tablecloth, deep red wine spreading like blood, glass scattering everywhere. Gasps echoed through the restaurant. Servers rushed over. The manager appeared from nowhere, his face pale with panic. Victoria pointed a shaking finger at Sarah. This is your fault. You just destroyed your entire career. I'm going to make sure you never work in this city again. Do you understand me? Never. But David hadn't moved. He sat perfectly still, his jaw tight, his eyes moving from Sarah to Victoria to the man at the bar, who now looked very uncomfortable and was trying to leave quietly. David stood up slowly, his movements controlled and precise. When he spoke, his voice was cold in a way that made Sarah's skin prickle. Victoria, we're leaving. Now. Victoria blinked, clearly not expecting that response. David, she's lying. She's just some jealous nobody who. Now, David repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned to Sarah, and for a brief moment, his expression softened just slightly. Thank you, he said simply. Just those 2 words. Then he walked toward the exit without looking back. Victoria grabbed her purse, her hands shaking with rage. She leaned close to Sarah, her voice a harsh whisper. You have no idea what you've just done. You're finished. Then she stormed out after David, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. The restaurant slowly came back to life, conversations resuming in hushed tones. But Sarah just stood there, frozen, her mind racing. What had she just done? Had she made the biggest mistake of her life? Her manager, Mr. Peterson, appeared at her elbow. His face was tight with worry and anger. Sarah, my office. Right now. She followed him through the kitchen, past curious stares from the other servers and cooks. He closed the office door behind them and turned to face her, running his hand through his thinning hair. What the hell was that? His voice was strained, trying to stay calm. Do you understand what you just did out there? I told him the truth, Sarah said, her voice quieter than she intended. She was cheating on him right in front of him. I couldn't just ignore it. Yes, you could have. Mr. Peterson's voice rose. You absolutely should have. That was David Harrison. David Harrison, Sarah. If he complains, if that woman complains, this restaurant could be ruined. Do you understand? Jobs could be lost. Not just yours. Everyone's. Sarah felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. I know who he was. But it still wasn't right. How could I just let him sit there like that? Mr. Peterson stared at her for a long moment, his expression a mix of frustration and something else. Maybe a tiny bit of understanding. He sighed heavily. Go home, Sarah. I need to figure out what to do about this. I need to talk to the owners. Just go home. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She grabbed her coat from the back and walked out into the rain. The cold drops hit her face immediately, soaking through her clothes as she started the long walk home. She couldn't afford a cab. She couldn't afford much of anything. Her tiny apartment was 15 blocks away, and she walked every step in the pouring rain, replaying the entire scene over and over in her mind. Victoria's furious face. The shattering glass. The stairs. David's quiet thank you. Had she done the right thing? Or had she just destroyed her life for nothing? By the time she reached her building, she was completely drenched. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs to her small studio apartment. The heat was barely working again. The window rattled in its frame. But it was home. She peeled off her wet clothes, changed into dry ones, and collapsed onto her worn couch. She should eat something, but she had no appetite. She should sleep, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. What would happen tomorrow? Would she still have a job? Would Victoria really try to ruin her? Could she even do that? Sarah thought about her bank account, which had barely enough to cover next month's rent. She thought about her mom back in Milwaukee, who was counting on Sarah to help with bills. She thought about how hard she had worked just to get this job, this life, this tiny bit of stability. Had she just thrown it all away? Sleep came eventually, but it was restless and full of anxious dreams. When morning light filtered through her thin curtains, Sarah woke with a headache and a sense of dread sitting heavy in her chest. She checked her phone. No messages from the restaurant. No missed calls. Nothing. The silence was somehow worse than a firing would have been. She made coffee with the last of her grounds and sat by the window, watching the city wake up below. People heading to work. Living their normal lives. Everything continuing as if nothing had changed. But for Sarah, everything felt different. Uncertain. Frightening. Then, around 9 in the morning, there was a knock at her door. Sarah's heart jumped. She wasn't expecting anyone. Cautiously, she looked through the peephole and saw a man in a professional uniform she didn't recognize. Not a delivery person. Not the landlord. Someone else. She opened the door a crack, the chain still on. Yes. Sarah Williams? The man asked politely. Yes. I have a delivery for you. He held up a small black envelope, the kind that expensive invitations come in. I need your signature. Confused, Sarah unchained the door and signed the electronic pad he held out. He handed her the envelope and left without another word. Sarah closed the door slowly, staring at the envelope in her hands. Her name was written on it in beautiful gold lettering. Expensive. Elegant. Nothing like anything she'd ever received before. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it. Inside the black envelope was a card. Not a regular card, but something made of thick, heavy material that felt expensive just to touch. It was deep black with a simple gold symbol embossed in one corner. No bank name. No numbers. Just that symbol. Underneath the card was a note on cream-colored paper, written in actual handwriting, not printed. You saw what everyone else chose to ignore. That kind of honesty is rare and valuable. Dinner tonight. I'll send a car at 7 p.m. We need to talk. David Harrison. Sarah read it 3 times, her mind struggling to process what it meant. David Harrison had sent her this. He hadn't complained to her boss. He hadn't ignored what happened. He had sent her a personal invitation. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. The card is yours. Keep it safe. The car will be there at 7. I owe you an explanation. Sarah sat down hard on her couch, still holding the card and note. This didn't make sense. She had expected to be fired. Maybe even threatened with a lawsuit. She hadn't expected this. She spent the entire day in a daze, trying to understand what was happening. Part of her wondered if this was some kind of trick. But the card felt real. The note looked genuine. And that text message, it had to be from him. By 6 o'clock, Sarah was standing in front of her small closet, staring at her limited options. She didn't own fancy clothes. She had one decent black dress, the same one she'd worn to every job interview and important occasion for the past 3 years. It wasn't designer. It wasn't glamorous. But it was clean and presentable. She put it on, did her best with her hair and makeup, and waited, her heart pounding harder with each passing minute. At exactly 7 o'clock, a sleek black car pulled up in front of her building. Sarah grabbed her purse, took a deep breath, and headed downstairs. The driver opened the door for her without a word. She slid into the back seat, and her breath caught. The interior was beautiful. Soft leather seats. Quiet music playing. Everything spotlessly clean and expensive. The car moved smoothly through Chicago's streets, taking her through neighborhoods she recognized, then into areas she'd only seen from a distance. Buildings got taller. Streets got cleaner. Everything looked more polished, more perfect. Finally, they pulled up in front of a restaurant Sarah had only read about in magazines. The kind of place where you needed reservations months in advance. The kind of place where regular people like her never went. The driver opened her door, and she stepped out onto a walkway made of smooth gray stone. A host in an immaculate suit greeted her at the entrance. Miss Williams, Mr. Harrison is expecting you. Please follow me. Her legs felt weak as she followed him through a lobby that looked like it belonged in an art museum. Everything was modern and clean and expensive. They took an elevator up, and when the doors opened, Sarah found herself in a private dining room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. And there, standing by the window with his back to her, was David Harrison. He turned when he heard her footsteps. In person, away from the chaos of last night, he looked younger than she expected. Maybe mid-30s. His expression was calm, unreadable, but not unfriendly. "Sarah," he said, gesturing to the table set for two. "Please sit down." She did, her hands folded tightly in her lap to keep them from shaking. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then David sat down across from her and gave her a small, genuine smile. "You're probably wondering why you're here," he said. "Yes," Sarah managed to say. "I am." David leaned back slightly in his chair. "Last night, you did something that most people would never do. You told me the truth, even though it could have cost you your job, your safety, everything. Do you know how rare that is?" Sarah shook her head slightly. I couldn't watch it happen. It didn't feel right to stay quiet." "Exactly," David said, and there was something in his voice that sounded almost relieved. "You acted because it was right, not because it benefited you. That's why you're here." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table. Sarah opened it carefully, her eyes scanning the documents inside. Financial records, text messages, photographs, bank statements, all involving Victoria. "She wasn't just cheating on me," David said, his voice hard now. "She was stealing from me. Her and that man at the bar, they were running a scheme. Victoria had access to some of my company accounts, access I gave her because I trusted her. They were creating fake contractors, fake projects, and funneling money out. Millions of dollars, Sarah. Millions." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. The man at the bar, his name is Richard Cole. He's a financial consultant who specializes in making money disappear. They've been doing this for almost 5 months." David's jaw tightened. "If you hadn't spoken up last night, I might never have known. Your warning made me suspicious. I had my security team look into everything. Within 6 hours, we had all the proof we needed." "What happened to them?" Sarah whispered. "They were arrested this morning," David said simply. "Both of them. They're facing serious charges. Fraud. Embezzlement. They're going to prison for a long time." Sarah felt dizzy. She had thought she was just pointing out a cheating girlfriend. She had no idea she'd uncovered a crime that big. "You didn't just save me from heartbreak, Sarah," David continued, his eyes meeting hers directly. "You saved my company. You saved my reputation. If this had continued, if they'd gotten away with more, the damage could have been catastrophic. So when I say thank you, I mean it from the bottom of my heart." Sarah didn't know what to say. She sat there, staring at this powerful man who was thanking her for something she'd done without thinking. Something she'd done simply because it felt wrong to stay silent. "I didn't do it for any of this," she finally said, her voice quiet. "I didn't even know about the money. I saw her betraying you, and I couldn't let it happen." "I know," David said, and his expression softened. "That's exactly what makes it matter. You didn't want anything from me. You weren't looking for a reward. You just did what was right. Do you know how rare that is, Sarah? Especially in my world." He gestured around them, at the expensive restaurant, the view of the city below. "In my world, everyone wants something. Everyone has an angle. Every conversation is a negotiation. Every friendship is really a business relationship. I've spent years surrounded by people who smile to my face while calculating how they can use me." His voice grew quieter. "Victoria fooled me completely. I thought she cared about me as a person, not just my money or my name. But she saw me as a target from day one. And I was blind to it." Sarah felt a surge of sympathy for him. Despite all his money and power, he'd been hurt just like anyone else. Betrayed by someone he trusted. "I'm sorry that happened to you," she said sincerely. "No one deserves that." David nodded, seeming to appreciate her words. Then he slid the black card toward her across the table. "This card is yours now, Sarah. It's not charity. Think of it as access. Access to opportunities you've never had before. Access to people who can help you. Access to a world that's been closed to you." Sarah stared at the card, almost afraid to touch it. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" "Nothing," David said firmly. "That's the point. I'm not asking for anything in return. But I am offering you something. A job if you want it. As my personal assistant. The salary is $200,000 a year, with benefits, health insurance, retirement, everything. Sarah's mouth fell open. $200,000? That was more than she'd made in the last 6 years combined. She couldn't form words. I don't know what to say. Say yes, David said with a small smile. I need someone around me who I can trust. Someone who will tell me the truth even when it's hard. Someone who acts with integrity. That's you, Sarah. Last night proved that. Tears suddenly filled Sarah's eyes. She had spent so many years struggling, working multiple jobs, barely surviving. She sent money to her mom whenever she could. She ate ramen noodles for dinner most nights. She hadn't bought new clothes in 2 years. And now this man was offering her a life she'd never even dreamed of. Why are you being so kind to me? She whispered. David's expression grew thoughtful. Because someone needs to be. Because good people shouldn't be punished for doing good things. And because I believe that when you have resources, you have a responsibility to recognize value when you see it. You have value, Sarah. More than you know. They talked for hours after that. David asked about her life, her family, her dreams. She told him about growing up in Milwaukee, about her mom who worked 3 jobs after her dad left, about moving to Chicago with nothing but hope and determination, about the years of struggle, the constant worry about money, the feeling of being invisible to the people she served every single day. He listened to all of it, really listened, in a way that made her feel seen for the first time in years. You remind me of my mother, David said eventually. She raised me alone after my dad died when I was 8. We had nothing. She cleaned houses, worked in factories, did whatever it took to keep us going. She never let me see her cry, but I knew how hard it was. His voice grew softer. She always told me that if I ever became successful, I should never forget where I came from. Never forget what it's like to struggle. Never forget to help people who remind me of us. He met Sarah's eyes. You remind me of us, Sarah. And my mother would have liked you. By the time the evening ended, Sarah had accepted his offer. How could she not? This was a chance to change her entire life. A chance to help her mom. A chance to finally stop struggling and start living. As the car drove her home that night, Sarah looked out at the city lights, feeling like she was dreaming. She thought about Victoria, sitting in a jail cell somewhere, her lies finally catching up with her. She thought about Richard Cole, his smug smile from the bar now long gone. And she thought about herself. About the choice she'd made to speak up even when she was terrified. About how one honest moment had changed everything. The next morning, Sarah received an official offer letter via email. She gave notice at the Golden Rose that same day. Mr. Peterson looked shocked, then relieved, then genuinely happy for her. You deserve this, Sarah, he said, shaking her hand. You've always been one of the good ones. Within a week, Sarah had moved into a new apartment. A real apartment, with heating that worked and windows that didn't rattle and space to actually breathe. She bought groceries without checking prices. She sent money to her mom, enough to finally pay off some debts that had been hanging over her for years. Her first day working for David was intimidating. His office was on the top floor of one of Chicago's tallest buildings. Everyone dressed expensively. Everyone moved with purpose and confidence. But David made sure she felt welcome. He introduced her to everyone, made it clear she had his trust and respect, and gave her responsibilities that actually mattered. Months passed, and Sarah's life transformed in ways she couldn't have imagined that rainy Tuesday night at the Golden Rose. She learned quickly, absorbing everything she could about business, about real estate development, about how David's empire actually worked. She discovered she had good instincts. Her years of reading people as a server, of understanding what they wanted before they asked, translated surprisingly well into the business world. David relied on her judgment, often asking her opinion before making major decisions. You see things other people miss, he told her once. You notice the details. That's valuable. But more than the job, more than the money, something else was growing between them. Something neither of them had expected. It started small. Conversations that went longer than they needed to. Coffee breaks where they talked about things that had nothing to do with work. Moments when their eyes would meet across a conference room and they'd share a knowing look about something ridiculous someone had just said. David was different than Sarah had imagined wealthy, powerful men would be. He was kind. He was thoughtful. He remembered small things she mentioned in passing. He asked about her mom and seemed genuinely happy when Sarah told him her mom had finally been able to quit one of her jobs. And Sarah found herself looking forward to seeing him each day. Found herself dressing a little more carefully. Found her heart beating faster when he smiled at her. One evening, about 6 months after she'd started working for him, they were alone in his office. Most of the staff had gone home. The city lights sparkled through the windows, Chicago stretching out below them in all its beautiful chaos. David stood by the window, looking out, his expression thoughtful. Sarah had been organizing some files, but something about his posture made her pause. "David, are you okay?" He turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that she'd never seen before. "I've been thinking about that night," he said quietly. "The night at the restaurant. The night you changed everything." Sarah set down the files and walked over to stand near him, not too close, but close enough that she could see his face clearly. "What about it? I keep thinking about how different my life would be if you hadn't spoken up," David said. "Victoria and Richard would have taken millions more. Eventually, they would have destroyed my company. And I would have been completely blind to it, thinking I was in love with someone who only saw me as a mark." He shook his head slowly. "But more than that, I think about how lonely I was. How surrounded by people I was, yet how alone I felt. Everyone wanting something from me. Everyone playing a role. And then you came along and just told me the truth. Asked for nothing. Expected nothing. I did what anyone should do," Sarah said softly. "But most people don't," David replied. He turned to face her fully now. "Most people would have looked away. Minded their own business. Protected themselves. You didn't. You risked everything for a stranger." He took a small step closer to her. "These past few months, working with you, getting to know you, it's been the first time in years that I've felt like I could trust someone completely. Like I could just be myself without worrying about what someone wanted from me." Sarah's heart was pounding now. She knew where this was going. She'd felt it building for weeks. "Sarah," David said, his voice gentle, "I don't know if you feel this too, but I need to be honest with you. Somewhere along the way, this stopped being just about gratitude for me. Stopped being just about respect and friendship." He reached out slowly, giving her time to step back if she wanted to, and took her hand in his. "I care about you. Not as my assistant. Not as the person who saved my company. As you. As Sarah. The woman who has more courage and integrity in her little finger than most people have in their entire body." Tears filled Sarah's eyes, but these were happy tears. "I feel it too," she whispered. "I've been afraid to say anything because I didn't want you to think I'd done all this to get close to you, or for the money, or—" "I would never think that," David interrupted gently. "I know exactly who you are, Sarah. You're the person who spoke up when it could cost you everything. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He squeezed her hand softly. "I don't know where this goes. I don't know what happens next. But I know I want you in my life. Not just as someone who works for me, but as someone I trust. Someone I care about. He paused, seeming to search for the right words. Someone I could maybe love if you'd give me that chance." Sarah smiled through her tears. "You already have that chance. You've had it for a while now." David smiled too, a real smile that reached his eyes and made him look younger and happier than she'd ever seen him. He reached up slowly and wiped away one of her tears with his thumb. "Thank you," he said softly. "For everything. For that first moment of courage. For every moment since. For being exactly who you are." And there, high above the city, in an office that still sometimes didn't feel quite real to her, Sarah Williams realized something important. She had walked into that restaurant months ago as someone invisible. Someone the world looked past without a second thought. Someone struggling just to survive. But she hadn't stayed invisible. One whispered truth, spoken when she was terrified, had opened a door to a life she never could have imagined. She hadn't asked for a reward. She hadn't expected anything in return. She'd simply done what felt right in her heart. And somehow, the universe had recognized that courage. Had answered it with opportunities and kindness, and now, maybe with love. "Thank you for giving me a chance," Sarah said softly. "For seeing me when I felt invisible." David shook his head gently. "You were never invisible, Sarah. Some of us just weren't looking closely enough. I'm grateful I finally saw you." Outside the window, the city lights sparkled like stars. Sarah thought about the girl she'd been just months ago. Scared. Struggling. Wondering if things would ever get better. That girl had found her voice. Had spoken up when it mattered. Had refused to stay silent even when silence would have been easier. And that courage, that one honest moment, had changed 2 lives forever. Because sometimes the smallest act of bravery can create the biggest transformation. Sometimes doing the right thing, even when you're terrified, is exactly what leads you to where you're meant to be. Sarah had learned that truth doesn't always cost you everything. Sometimes, if you're lucky, it gives you everything instead. The rain had stopped. The city gleamed below. And Sarah Williams, who had once felt invisible, now stood in the light, exactly where she belonged. If this story touched your heart, remember that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, "I'll speak up." Sometimes it's doing the right thing even when you're shaking with fear. Your honesty matters. Your integrity matters. You matter. What would you have done in Sarah's position? Would you have spoken up or stayed silent? Share your thoughts in the comments below.